All right, so as I already said, my name is Carolyn Keller. I'm the founder of Curio 412, and today's session is all about funding your impact. So if you're here with us today, what we're hoping we can do is equip you to use diverse funding strategies to create impact. So if you're here today with us, you're likely a nonprofit or a business looking to find better ways to fund what matters most to you. So today we'll talk about where you can implement diverse strategies, not only for funding your impact, but financing it as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. One of the things that I always think about when I think about funding is that it's important to have a diverse portfolio of revenue so that you're not relying on one source and have multiple opportunities to expand and really take advantage of all of the different funding that is out there. A little bit about me. I'm a purpose-driven consultant, started Curio 412 a few years ago after nearly a decade of working in the social sector. I have worked with a number of different organizations, everything from nonprofits to government organizations, libraries, for-profits, social impact businesses, and I'm certified through the National Institute for Social Impact. So I love giving back to the community, helping others figure out the best ways that they can get their organizations in a good place to give back and make that difference for people. So that's just a little bit about where I am. And one of the reasons that I decided to focus on impact is because even though I had been working with a number of nonprofits and working in the social sector, there were always areas where we needed help thinking about how to measure and manage the work that we were doing so that we could really effectively communicate it. So whenever I think about impact, I think about it as a change in people's lives for the better or worse. And when I think about managing that impact, I really think about using the data that you have to plan, organize, and implement so that you have a measurable outcome in mind. That way you're always understanding where you're starting and where you're going, so you can figure out how to adjust and make that impact even greater. Some of the processes that I have used to work in this area really help to see where your impact begins, what changes occur, and then how you really measure that so that you can use it effectively in order to really affect both the inside and outside of your organization. So when you're able to effectively manage and measure your impact, there are a couple of different things that'll start to happen in your organization. One is that you can start to drive objectives and goals. You can set the different areas of focus for your organization and really have a clear direction on where you're going. You can also set baselines to say, okay, if this is where we are today, and we'd like to see more engagement, or we'd like to see that our organization is able to serve more people or have a greater capacity, we can really set that standard and then say, okay, in order to do better, we need to do X, Y, and Z to get there. And that'll help you to scale for success too. And the other thing that I think is really great when it comes to understanding, measuring, and managing your impact is that you can cultivate better support from your stakeholders, which is where the funding part of today's topic comes in, is that there are all different kinds of people who will support your organization, everything from volunteers to board members, advisory members, your funders, people who are going to come to events and possibly engage financially with your organization. And when you're really able to show them and demonstrate the impact and difference that you've made, you'll be able to continually cultivate support from them. And we'll get into a lot of that today. The other thing that I wanted to mention before we get started is that at Curio 412, we do work with a number of both nonprofits and for-profits. And one of the things that we focus on is that impact in your community can happen regardless of your tax status. I'm sure that everyone on our call today knows a business that gives back in a big way. 87% of businesses have some sort of philanthropic component to their business. And while many businesses do have the traditional sponsorship, corporate donations, volunteerism, there are a growing number of social impact businesses as well that have that mission really built into the work that they're doing. So that's why today's session, we're focusing on impact in general and a number of different funding sources for both nonprofits and for-profits as it applies to organizations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, looking to make a difference in their communities. One of the things I wanted to start with today was looking at what it means to be a nonprofit. This is from a book I read recently And I'm sure we're all familiar with the definition of nonprofit. When we traditionally think about how we make a difference in the world, we kind of think about two tracks of where work might fall. You might go into business because you want to make a profit. You know you can have a little bit more stability. And then when you think about trying to make a difference in the world, you might think about going into the nonprofit work and nonprofit sector. And while, like I said, there are some social impact businesses and they're shifting dynamics, we all kind of understand that there are somewhat of these two tracks, even though it is getting a little bit gray. And the traditional definition of nonprofit is really not conducted for the purpose of making a profit. But when you look at the Latin roots of the word nonprofit, you find out that non is for not, and profectus means to advance or progress. So the word literally means no progress. And we don't really want our nonprofits to not make progress. And so what I'm going to do first, before we even go into talking about funding for today, is I want to explore some of the ways in which we think about how nonprofits make an impact, how in general we make an impact. So I want to explore some true false questions. I'm going to pull up a poll and ask you all to just answer. There's true false for 6 questions, I believe, in here. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. If you can't see the poll, please type in the chat and we'll try to get you clued in to what's going on. But you should see those 6 questions here. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to fill those out. And I should be able to see the results as they come in. So go ahead and start typing in your thoughts. All right, it looks like everyone has completed it. I would say usually give me a thumbs up, but it doesn't look like I can see everyone's faces on the call. So if you aren't done, give me a type in the chat and I can give you more minutes, but it looks like just about good here. Oh, got some thumbs up on the side. Thanks, Bob. All right. So can everyone see the results on the screen now? Should be able to. You can give me a yes or no, thumbs up, type in the chat. Fantastic. All right, so the first question that we have here is nonprofits are businesses. Everyone answered true to this, which is great. There are a lot of people, you might be surprised, that don't think that nonprofits are necessarily business, that they have a pure charitable mission, which is true. Many nonprofits have that pure charitable mission, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't take resources such as time and talent and building space and employees in order to make those organizations move and make that impact happen. So great to see. Second question, true or false, low overhead means strong management. So everyone said false to this. As you all know, there are resources we just mentioned that you need. And in order to make the difference that you need to do, you have to have those resources. And that's one of the reasons we talk about funding them today. Overhead is only one metric that you can use to take a look at a nonprofit, but to really get a full picture of what's going on in any organization, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, there's much more than overhead. All right, third question. Money can solve any community problem, true or false? And everyone said false to this. Very, 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 very true. Money cannot solve any community problem. As you all know, working in this space, it takes a lot of time and effort and knowledge to really understand what's going on in your community. You need strong methods of evaluation and research. And so definitely money is one component of resources that you need, but it is not all of the picture from when you are looking at your organization and how you're making an impact. All right, question number 4. Volunteers are free. And everyone answered false to this. I think the volunteers are such a dynamic part of any organization. They do operate to help organizations save a lot of cost whenever it comes to employee, but there is also a lot that goes into maintaining a good volunteer base, having a good volunteer culture. And so, as you all know, making sure that your volunteers are supported takes those resources and effort too. All right, and then we've got our last 2 questions. Number 5, nonprofits are more ethical for profits. So we had 1 true, 1 false with this. So this is always an interesting question because there are many nonprofits and all of them have some sort of community-based, service-based mission to them. But oftentimes their actions can be just as less ethical as any organization that you might find, whether they're a nonprofit or a for-profit, which is why it's important whenever you look at funding and pursuing funding from other people, stakeholders, individual donors, foundations, that you want to make sure that your organization is very transparent about the ethics that are going on in the way your organization is operating. I think oftentimes we hold nonprofits maybe at a higher standard than for-profit organizations, but in some ways this is changing as well. There's a certain level of integrity that needs to be demonstrated by a nonprofit and a for-profit to know whether or not you want to do business with that organization. If you knew there was an organization, I say organization, but a business in your community that was maybe ripping people off or doing something that wasn't quite kosher with what the business operation should be, you probably wouldn't shop there. And so while there are a lot of different ways to think about ethics when it comes to nonprofits and businesses, always just interesting to note how people think about nonprofit, for-profit, how they operate in today's world. All right, and then last question. A nonprofit can't earn a profit. So we have 1 true, a few false in here. So a little bit of a mixed result. What I've found is that some people think that true nonprofits are usually all volunteer workers. And the truth is that the nonprofit designation is a tax status. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, CPA, talk to your accountants, talk to the people who can help guide your organization. But when it comes to this tax designation, what having that nonprofit designation means is that any revenue generated or profit generated by that nonprofit organization must go back into the organization and be retained by the organization. So in other words, it goes back into the mission. And so nonprofits can make a profit. It's just not something that is, because nonprofits are publicly held instead of privately held, it's not a profit that goes back into the owners or the stakeholders or shareholders, but a profit that goes back into the mission. And there are actually cases where nonprofits have what's called a unrelated business income tax, where maybe they have a mission, but they're conducting something not related to their mission, and they can be taxed on this. So in order to remain non-taxable under that 501c3, that revenue generated must be related to the mission, or you may be liable for that non-business or unrelated business income tax, which is called the UBIT. So just some interesting things to think about. So also important when we're talking about funding, because if we think about limiting ourselves when it comes to funding or thinking that we necessarily can't make a profit, we're missing out on a number of different opportunities to be able to grow and invest into our mission. So thanks for taking that poll. We're going to stop sharing that and jump in to the first part of what I want to talk about today when it comes to funding. So when it comes to funding your impact, key to this is building support and having a good support system. So as you all know, Any good support system includes your team, whether they're volunteers or employees, your donors and customers. If you operate an organization that's maybe more of like a heritage or cultural center or museum, or other type of building or place that people come. There are other stakeholders that are engaged with your organization, whether those are businesses that work with you or organizations that supply you. And that's true for any business or nonprofit. So there are all of those different things. And today, we're not going to necessarily focus too much in on your internal team. We're going to focus a lot on the external, where you can find some of those opportunities for funding. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the fundraising cycle as it relates to somewhat of the internal and how you make the internal elements of your team work to bring those supporters into your organization that may not be currently involved. So some of you might have seen this before. This is called the funding or support cycle. It moves around in 4 different categories. First, you think about identifying prospects. Once those prospects are identified, and prospects, I should say too, could be a number of things. So this is funding and support. So this could be individual donors, recurring donors, large gift donors, volunteers, board members, advisory board members. This process works for all kinds of things, whether it's financial support or support in relation to in-kind or time as well. So once you've identified those people who are likely to support your organization in some way, you want to engage them and involve them in the work that you're doing. After they've been engaged and involved, that's when you get to this part of the ask, which if you're asking for money, maybe that's asking someone for a financial donation. Maybe it's asking someone to join your board. There are a number of different asks you can have. But after that ask, you want to go into that 4th category, which is thanking and recognizing, making sure that the people who you are engaging, involving, and getting incorporated into your organization understand how much their participation means to you and how much it helps the organization. When you think about these 4 different areas, nearly everyone in your organization should fit somewhere in this cycle. Everyone has different skills. So think about some of the people that are internal to your organization, whether those are your team members, volunteers, board, advisors, and you can think about the skills that they have and think about how those skills might fit in. So if you know someone who's really great at socializing or networking, maybe they're a great person for introducing you to prospects. Maybe they know a few people who might be able to introduce you to other prospects. They might also be good at engaging and involving those people in your organization. And then if you maybe have skills that are more related to details, maybe you're good at scanning lists of people to identify who might be a good prospect and doing kind of that back end prospecting. Or maybe you might be good at planning an event that would be a really great way to engage people with your organization. Or maybe managing details of a mailing list if you do those types of things with your organization. If you're a writer, maybe you're someone who can write letters of invitation or letters of thanks. And I should say the thank and recognize is also something that if you're a engaging person who likes to network and really be engaged with people, that thanking and recognizing is a place as well. When you think about all of these different phases, and then you may have someone too who's very outgoing and doesn't mind making that ask. And so there are people that fit into every part of this cycle. And you can even take this cycle back to your team and say, hey, this is how this cycle works. Where do you think you best fit? How do you think this works with our organization? I'm going to pull up a pie chart that shows how these are typically allocated, each of these 4 categories. Partially to show that everyone seems to think that the most intimidating part is that ask. A lot of people don't like asking for money. They don't like making that final jump across the finish line, but that's okay because there's a large part of this cycle where you need to be engaging and thanking. There's a large part of the cycle where you need to be identifying, and the ask is actually that smallest part. So there are many ways that everyone at your organization can be involved in building support, whether that's financial or time commitment or any other types of support, without ever having to make that ask for your organization. So don't get too intimidated by that ask. And when you're thinking about incorporating your team and some of the things we're going to talk about later today, keep this in mind, because there may be places you can plug people in to be able to get them to that point where maybe they're never asking someone for money or asking someone for their support, but they are playing an integral role in either identifying or engaging thinking. The other thing that I wanted to mention is this idea of selling your mission. When you think about funding, you're thinking about people who are investing into your mission. And so the question I always ask is, why do people give to the causes that they care about? And typically, when someone gives, they're giving to your organization because they want to make a difference for something they believe to be either a problem or a challenge or something that has meaning for them. And they believe that becoming a part of your charitable work is going to make the difference that they want to see as a reality. And so when they invest in your organization, they want to know that their funding that they're giving you and their contributions not only count, but that those funds can go as far as possible with your organization. And this demonstrable difference that your organization can show potential funders is really the value that people aim to invest in when they think about your organization. So I always think about how anyone who gives is really making an investment. It's not a traditional investment that's going to come back to them in dollars and cents, but it's an investment that's going to come back in visible and tangible ways in which their contribution is making a difference. And that's the true value. So remember that someone who's investing in your organization wants to see a change in a certain action or a change in a certain condition that they're seeing. So as any good salesperson might do, when you sell your mission, you should have a compelling value proposition. So in marketing, I'm sure we've all heard the term value proposition. This is that strategy that your company, your organization is going to promise to deliver in exchange for the product or service that customers buy. Or in the case of making impact and having a charitable mission, it may not be a product or service that a customer is buying, but it's the change that your funders are investing in. So this message should focus on really that transformative piece, that what happens with your organization when you have the right resources in the right place for the right time for those people or cause that you serve. What's that difference that happens? Because that's where you're going to really get that value. So think about that in terms of asking yourself, what value does your organization provide? One example of this is up on the side here of this slide for selling your mission. And this organization is actually not a nonprofit organization. This is Patagonia's homepage, or was at one point in time Patagonia's homepage. And although they're a for-profit brand, their homepage says we're in business to save our home planet. And they lead their value proposition with this premise that not only are they here to sell a product, but they're here to create environmental sustainability. So you're not just buying a coat, you're trusting Patagonia to help the planet. And so similarly, if you think about this when thinking about your organization, say you're a museum or a cultural center, when a person visits your museum, they're not just buying a ticket to come and see exhibits. They're trusting your organization to preserve the history of whatever it is your organization's focus is. And they're also trusting that you're going to bring a shared experience to you and your family, or you and your friends, or the people who you're visiting with, that experience is going to be a positive one for them as well. So really think about not only what your organization does, but then the value that it provides. All right, so we're finally getting to the funding part of this, I guess fun part as well. We're going to focus on three big areas of funding today. The first is donations, and the second is grants, And then the third is earned income. We could be here all day if we wanted to get very, very detailed on each of these. And there are many, many resources for donors and grants. Aren't as many resources on earned income. So what we are going to do is touch briefly on some strategies for donations when it comes to thinking about either individual donors or growing other giving types of strategies when it comes to individuals. Second thing, when we look at grants, is touch very briefly on some opportunities where you might find grants, how you might go about making sure that those grants match up with the mission of your organization. And we'll provide some further resources so we can dig in. But if you do have other questions, feel free to ask more details. But we'll spend a lot of our time giving some examples of earned income since there aren't as many resources out there for earned income. So first one we want to talk about today is donations. So if you are a 501c3 or charitable organization, donations are usually a significant portion of your revenue. Most organizations have at least 34% of revenue from individual donors. One of the benefits to having a good portion of your funding come in through individual donors is that likely this revenue is often unrestricted, which means you can spend these funds in whatever way you believe is appropriate to further your mission, which can be operational, staffing, those nuts and bolts of keeping the lights on and the heat on and those types of things. Whereas sometimes with grant programs, if you're not going for a specific operating grant, they're very programmatically related, which means you might not be able to use them on certain things. Whenever you're thinking about donations, one of the things that you want to remember is that while you'll have a large portion of proceeds and revenue coming in from donations, or you at least want to have a good portion of them coming in, you'll want to note that most individual donors give less than $1,000 at a time. So depending on your budget, your fundraising goals, you're likely going to need to continually expand your audience and keep your audience engaged in the process of your organization and progress of your organization and reaching the impact that you hope to have and what you see towards your mission. This, by keeping donors informed of where your organization is in making a difference, then you're able to demonstrate that that donor's investment and trust in your organization has made a positive difference, that it's been fulfilled, that it's been worth the investment that they've made. We do have a couple of resources that we talked about earlier in the year about measuring and managing your impact and aligning your impact goals with your operations. These are some great resources that you can use to think about how you're going to collect this information and then be able to communicate it with donors so that they're engaged with how your organization is making a difference. There are typically 3 stages to any type of program if you want to build a donor base. First is to identify, and then this follows that fundraising cycle pretty closely. But 3 big ones are identify, engage, and thank. So when you identify, we talked a little bit about prospecting earlier, and when you identify prospects or identify your audience, what you're looking to do is understand who they are and where they hang out, what's important to them, what makes them excited. And when we talk about where they hang out, we're talking about, what's the best way to reach them? Are we going to have a better reach on social media, or do we have a better reach through a physical mailing campaign? Once you have a good idea, then you're able to really allocate resources to reaching in the most effective way. And that will help you really narrow in to ensuring that your funding is going in the best places possible. When you engage people, you're obviously inviting them to become a part of your organization. When you're talking about funding, you're in this step leading them to make their first donation with your organization. And so this means that you're going to need to tell a very compelling story about how your organization makes a change. There are a number of different ways to do this. We've talked about a couple of places where you can start in terms of platforms and media when it comes to social media, email marketing, annual reports, in letter campaigns. There's all kind of those traditional ways to reach donors, as well as some others that you can go to as well, like fundraising events and those types of things that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Lastly, the thank step in this is making sure that you have good stewardship of your donors. So this involves not only recognizing and thanking your donors, but then showing them the impact of their donations. So that way you can cultivate recurring donors. When people constantly see, I'm giving money, and then when I give money, this is happening at the organization, then they're likely to continue to give or to even increase the gift that they give to your organization. So for example, if you're a library and you're a donor that was really excited about children's programming, every time you see something about children's programming in different capacities, say you have a children's book group or a teen coding program or even a elementary coding program or other types of ways that students are engaged at a library, you'll say, oh my gosh, I donated the money to make that happen, and here's the result of that. And so when you do that thanking, make sure you're also showing donors what they care about and how what they care about is actually manifesting through the gifts that they make. The other thing that I'll say about donations before we move on to the grants area of this is make sure you have multiple touch points. You want to be able to reinforce how your mission is impacting the people or topics that you serve. And it's when you think about people seeing things over and over again, I heard at one point in time that before people make a purchase, they have to see something at least 7 times before they start thinking about it. And so it's similar with donors, where you're obviously not asking your donors to make a purchase, but you are asking them to give a certain amount of money. And so being able to have multiple touch points, whether that's they're seeing things on your social media, they're receiving your emails, maybe they're coming in and they're engaging with one of your volunteers or staff members, and they're having a positive experience. All of those things are going to be the touch points you need to keep those donors engaged and invested in your organization. So that's the quick piece on donations. So now let's talk about grants. Grants are really great for both businesses and nonprofits. It's often a way that you can get a large amount of funds at the same time. Oftentimes money is allocated towards certain programs. It's often not as flexible as some of the donations that you might get, but in general, regardless of what types of grants you're looking for, we want to try to avoid the spaghetti on the wall technique. I've heard a lot of people who say we're just going to throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. And I love spaghetti, but we don't want to see what sticks. There are a number of ways that when you're looking for grants, you can increase your chances of being able to receive that grant before you even write the grant or apply for it. So this includes some basic things like checking your eligibility on the website and making sure that you clearly understand your funder's priorities. These are like things like areas of interest or geographic focus. And oftentimes it's worth reaching out. I know I've worked with a number of people where we had a certain area of fundraising or of a focus that we wanted to fund and found an organization, foundation that seemed like a great match for us. Turned out that their website was maybe 2 or 3 years out of date and they didn't have that funding priority anymore. So even when you find something on a website, it's nice to reach out and make contact with the program officers at those organizations and just have a conversation about, here's what our organization does. Do you think we're a good fit? Here are the different programs we have. I've had some great conversations with program officers when you make that personal connection and they learn a little bit more about your organization, they might help guide you in the right direction. So if they're the right group, they might say, oh, okay, well, we already fund X, Y, and Z program, but we think that this program that you do is really unique. You'd have a really great chance of getting this grant if you apply under this program. And so that's very helpful. Or if they can't help, oftentimes they're connected enough in the funder community to be able to point you in the right direction of we don't deal with this in our organization, but you should check out X, Y, and Z Foundation. They have some really great programs that you're probably eligible for. So definitely avoid the spaghetti on the wall technique. Make sure you're doing your research, looking into it. It does take time, but it is certainly worth it in the end. It obviously doesn't make it a sure deal. There are always different things where grants have a number of organizations that are, or I say grants, but foundations have a number of organizations that are applying. So it is often about what kinds of applicants they're seeing in that pool, what kind of needs they see, but having that relationship will be a great place to start. In terms of where to look for grants, there are numerous places where you can find databases that will help you to sort through so that even before you reach out to an organization, you'll probably have a good idea if you're a good fit. One of these is Candid or the Foundation Directory online. That is a great website. It's putting it in the chat here. You can go through and do a number of different searches. And while there is a subscription base for a lot of these databases, there are some opportunities for open source as well. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Another great directory is GrantStation. And then if you're an organization that may be interested in government funding, grants.gov always has a number of different things going on. So worthwhile checking into each of those. And those are, like I said, great databases. Sometimes there are fees associated with those databases due to just the amount it takes to compile them. But you can also do keyword searches. So you can think about what your organization does, the programs you have, and apply that to just a general Google search. And that will sometimes come back with some good results as well. There are a number of resources that can help you find what resource to look for grants might be right for you. These are things like PANO, the PA Association of Nonprofit Organizations. The Carnegie Library Pittsburgh has a nonprofit resource center where I'm not sure exactly how they do it now. Prior to COVID, you had to go in physically be in the library, but they had free access. They had their own subscription to the Foundation Directory online, and you could search it through their subscription. I know during COVID, they had opened that up and it was accessible online as well. I'm not sure if it's still the same though, but if you reach out to them, you should be able to learn a little bit more about what resources they still have. And someone on this call may know. We can talk about that after we get into our sharing portion of this. But I'll put that Center for Nonprofit Resources in the chat as well. Another great resource is the Bayer Center for Nonprofit Management. All of these different resources, PANO, Nonprofit Resource Center at Carnegie, and then the Bayer Center for Nonprofit Management, they all have classes, programs, services, everything from how to write your first grant and how to submit and report for your first grant to where you want to go to search or even support for leadership. So definitely check those out. So, and that's about what we have on grants for now. So getting into earned income. So what I think is great about earned income is that you don't just have to fundraise for your impact. So we've all probably done a number of galas, we've done the individual donors, and those, like I said, you want a diverse pool, you want to be able to have all of those things. But when you think about earned income opportunities, this is not a way not only to fundraise, but to finance your impact. There are some common earned income opportunities that many organizations engage with, and we have some of those below. But having the option of earned income gives organizations more freedom to focus on their mission because they're not constantly worrying about how they're going to pay for all of those operational costs. nice part about earned income is similar to donations. There are no restrictions on how that funding can be used. And so I really enjoy thinking about different ways that organizations can leverage earned income for their organizations. One pitfall to avoid when thinking about earned income opportunities is that you want to consider your organization's capacity as well as how to optimize your return on investment. So we'll talk about some of the common earned income opportunities in just a minute, but for sales, say your organization has a gift shop, but it's difficult to keep it staffed and it's really not bringing in the money that you anticipated that it would every month. Those are areas where if it's more of a resource drain on your organization than a benefit, then you might need to reevaluate. Or if you don't have the capacity to support something like that, maybe you think about partnering with another group for a different type of earned income opportunity. So always consider your capacity as an organization and what that return might be for your organization too. Some common ways that you can have earned income for your impact or your cause is sales. So this involves things like gift shops, cafes, the Girl Scout cookie method of just having sale campaigns. There's also things like classes and services. If you offer things that are both educational or cultural that you would like to be able to charge for, or have kind of special VIP types of things that people can come to as classes or services that your organization can provide. Another way is to rent space. So if you have a space that is rentable, you can do corporate, social, a lot of places do weddings. I work with an organization called the Pittsburgh North Regional Chamber, and we have a rental space that is usually for corporate organizations, but any funding that comes from the rental of that space goes into our foundation, which provides annual scholarships for continuing education. So that is one of the ways that we utilize earned income in order to really continue to fund the students that are in our community. And then there's partnerships too. So partnerships can happen between any entities, whether they're nonprofits or for-profits. So when the options maybe aren't possible to rent space, or you're an organization that wants to continue to have maybe free services in certain areas, then partnerships are maybe a good way to go. One example of a recent local partnership that I saw was between Millie's Ice Cream in Wexford and North Hills Community Outreach. And so this is ice cream from Millie's on this slide. They were able to create their own custom flavor, which was the NHCO kitchen cupboard. And when that flavor was purchased and NHCO was mentioned at the checkout, 20% of the proceeds went to support their programs and services. So sounded like a delicious way and a great way to get some more awareness of the mission of that organization out in the space where maybe people wouldn't have been aware of the work that North Hills Community Outreach is doing until they encounter it somewhere in a completely different space. So I really am a fan of partnerships just because you're able to continue to grow your audience base, which could then also contribute to growing your donor base as well. So it kind of serves the two purposes there. There are a few examples I have of organizations that are really elevating and then taking advantage of earned income. One here is Living in Liberty. This is a resale store some of you may be familiar with. It's off of McKnight Road up north of Pittsburgh. Living in Liberty has their repurposed store, which is a thrift store, but their mission is to restore dignity and freedom to victims of commercial sexual exploitation. They have a number of different things that they do, and their store actually serves a variety of purposes, not only to generate revenue for their mission, but also to contribute to what they do with their mission as well. So many of the women and people who they support end up working in these spaces as well, learning skills that they need in order to continue to get back into the space where they need to be, where they can live independently. It also provides awareness, so anyone who comes to shop at Repurposed usually gets feel for what Living in Liberty is about and the mission. And so it raises awareness of human trafficking. And it also is an opportunity where they support other organizations that are doing this work around the world. They have a special boutique within their store, which has a number of items that are self-made items and go back towards that anti-trafficking work. So there are a number of ways in which this thrift store that they have isn't just a thrift store, but it helps the people they serve. It helps raise awareness of the cause on a more global scale. So just a really great way that they've been able to bring this earned income opportunity together for their mission and for their finances. Second example that I wanted to share with you was an organization also local to Pittsburgh called Digital Bridges Pittsburgh. Digital Bridges is an organization that works to ensure students have access to high quality technology and entrepreneurship opportunities in education. These are typically areas that are very underserved when it comes to the traditional school system, and often empowers people to have a much better quality of life because it encourages people to be able to take their own initiative and have independence in maintaining their own finances. So what Digital Bridges does for earned income is slightly different. Living in Liberty that we just looked at is, I believe, a full 501c3 nonprofit for all of their activities. Digital Bridges has a LLC, which protects their educational curriculum when it comes to the technology and education curriculum, but then operate with a fiscal sponsorship that allows them to pursue grant funding. So they have a combination of earned income that comes from that curriculum, but then they also have the ability to pursue grants that allow them to work in areas with populations that are often low income or underserved that wouldn't have the ability to afford the classes or curriculum without that grant funding. So a really great way in which they've leveraged earned income through the curriculum and also incorporated the idea of being able to diversify their funding through grants as well. Last example I wanted to share with you today is actually an organization out of Colorado Springs. This is a organization that started out as a for-profit business, the Adam and Son Auto Repair. And when COVID hit, they started what they called their Stranded Motorist Fund. And it was with the purpose of supporting families who were struggling to afford vehicle repairs. And they allowed a number of donated hours and encouraged their staff to engage in those donated hours to do vehicle repairs. They've also expanded it to include vehicle donations. So if there's someone who has a car that's at the end of its life, they will take those cars, they'll fix it, they'll make sure that it's safe and drivable, and they'll give it to someone in need and donate that car on behalf of the person who is given it. So they do take a portion of the proceeds to cover sort of the equipment costs, but they use it as a way that they can really give back to their community. And now many of those funds go into a 501c3, which acts as a foundation to be able to support those families in need. So they've done a really great way of taking a for-profit business and making that impact and funding that impact primarily through the business that they do in a traditional sense. One of the other programs that they have is called their Trifecta fundraiser. They have programs that helps charities and nonprofits raise money for organizations by donating oil changes. So the story, as I was told it, was the owner of the company had a student that came back and had to sell magazines or candy for a school fundraiser. And he said, so you're going to have to sell 3,000 of these bars in order for us to be able to pay X, Y, and Z for whatever it was for school. And he decided to do something similar, but with a greater return. So the program started out that way, but still continues and is open to a number of different nonprofits. 80% of the purchase price of the oil changes goes directly to the nonprofit. And now that they have their Stranded Motorist Fund, the remaining 20% of the purchase goes into that stranded motorist fund. So they're able to, like I said, still maintain their business and general operations as earned income. But when it comes to raising money and funding the impact they want to have on people who may need help supporting families that are struggling to afford vehicle repairs, or nonprofits that want to really leverage a great fundraiser that gives a large percentage back to their organization, they've found a way that they've been able to do it through this combination of earned income and 501c3. So just some really great things happening. I know that we're getting closer to the end. I want to save time for questions and conversation. So I'm going to wrap it up here and end our recording, but I'm really glad that you all were able to join us today. And I'm hoping that you walk away today feeling a little bit better equipped to think about funding and fundraise and finance for the impact that your organization has. So with that being said, I'll stop our recording, and if you'd like to unmute, bring up your camera, we'll have a little bit of a conversation.